If everyone's ready, we're going to go ahead and get started. Call the meeting to order. Before we get started, as we always do, we'd like to take a moment of silence just to remember those who've passed since our last meeting, retired and active. All right, thank you. I appreciate that. Let's go ahead and move to our first items. Go ahead and take a look at the board meetings from the last meeting. We have approval of minutes from December 2016 to June 2017.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Again, the December meeting last year was the final regular meeting of the year. After that, we had the electronic meetings throughout the interim. We took minutes for each of those, but no action was taken, including the adoption of minutes. So you actually have 7 sets of minutes for approval.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the December 2016, January 2017, February 2017, March 2017, April 2017, May 2017, and June 2017 minutes.
All right, we have a second. Any discussion on that? Okay, motion carries. Oh, before we carry the motion, I've been told we need to have a vote. New concept. All in favor? Aye.
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 Now the motion carries.
Okay, next up on the agenda is the legislative update. Paul Neal from the Left 2 Board will be presenting that for the members online.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Paul Neal, Left 2 Board staff, talking about the legislative update. And let me just load the PowerPoint here. As you know, the legislature went right up to the very end of their available time this year before passing a capital budget, which they passed on June 30th, the last day of the biennium. The budget, at least as far as the Left Plan 2 Board is concerned, is more notable for what it did not do than for what it did. First, what it did do, it fully funded the Left Plan 2 contribution rates that were adopted by the board. That may seem like a no-brainer, but for those of you that are new on the board, that is kind of a big deal since that has been an issue in the past. So that was definitely a good thing to have happen. The Left 2 Benefit Improvement Account, which again for the new members was passed in 2008 and first put money in it in 2011, is designed to have contributions put in this account to be set aside for future benefit improvements for Left Plan 2. There's a target formula for when money would be put in. That target has been met pretty much every year since 2013, I believe. And the money was not put in the last 2 years. They said instead they amended the statute to put the contribution date out 2 more years, and there was language in there saying that they would look for, quote, alternative sources of funds, meaning the Left Plan 2 Trust Fund, to make the contribution possibly. So that's like an annual discussion that happens every year, and I'm sure will happen again next year. The other issue that was in the final budget was a change in how employer contributions are made when local law enforcement officers are, I'm not sure what the right term would be, loaned out to special events, and then the special event person reimburses the city or the locality for the cost of those, the compensation of those officers, including pension contributions. The change in the budget is that when that happens, the employer is responsible for a full 50% of the contribution, not just the 30% that would normally be required. So that was a change. And there was...
Now, are there any questions about either the benefit improvement account or this special event compensation change before we move on?
Mr. Chair, this is Dennis. Got a question for you.
Oh.
Go ahead, Dennis.
On the how do they track, or what is the reporting mechanism for, as an example, if somebody was going to work a detail at the Seahawks game or something like that? How do they report that? Who's responsible for that?
The employer reports it. So, as a hypothetical, say you were a City of Seattle police officer and you were assigned to special duty to provide security during a Seahawk football game at Safeco or at CenturyLink. Then what would happen is the City of Seattle would have a contract with the Stadium Management Authority, and for however many officers they are required, and then the stadium management would pay the city for each of those officers. That would include all the costs to the city, such as salary, overtime perhaps, the city's share of the pension contributions for those hours, and then those hours get reported to the Department of Retirement System just like any other hours.
Okay.
This change, though, will be they can't be reported just like any other hours now, because the state share of the contributions won't get billed against the state. The employers will be responsible for that piece. So that's the change.
All right, thank you.
Ade, did you have a question?
Yeah, regarding this special event, does that mean we will force to report to DRS the number of hours worked? Then the DRS will bill the employer, or do we just pay directly the DRS based on the number of hours worked for this special event? How will this really work? I foresee a lot of administrative paperwork.
Well, yeah, I think anytime you create a special subclass of employees, and you've got to create procedures around them. I believe someone was going to be your KRS.
With respect to that, Ade, yes, I think the understanding is that employers will report those hours just like they do now. You will pay your share of the contributions as soon as you report them, just like you do now. So there won't be a separate billing. We do have Sean Merchant from the Department of Retirement Systems here to answer questions about the implementation of this budget proviso. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sean if you want to introduce yourself, and then kind of let the board know where DRS is at on the implementation of this.
Sure. For the record, Sean Merchant, Assistant Director with the Department of Retirement Systems, and I am nothing if not timely. So, substitute Senate Bill 5883, the bill that would have LEF employers pay the state share of contributions if they're hired out for overtime. We are implementing that bill. I'd like to point out, I don't know if Steve has mentioned this, but LEF members themselves are not directly affected. Their earnings will continue to apply to their accounts and service accumulations as it happens today, and the benefit calculation is not affected. And we are currently in process of implementing the bill. We do have a project team that is put together. It's headed by Marla Mortensen. She's a senior project manager at the Department of Retirement Systems, a lot of experience doing complicated legislative implementations, and previously had worked on the LEF team, so she's intimately familiar with LEF and how that works, and had worked with the employer unit as well. So you've got this bill is in good hands, is I guess what I'm trying to say. As soon as we know how exactly that we will administer the collection of the non-employer salary data and the payment of the state contributions from the LEF to employers for this change, we will be communicating it to LEF employers. We're still sort of doing the initial research on that to make sure that we do it correctly. The bottom line is we want to make sure that when your employers, when you guys are going out and doing overtime that is, say, for an event or something like that, the event sponsor is going to be paying the state's portion of that overtime, so your employer is going to collect that from them. When it comes into us, we want to make sure that our system, and this is a challenge for us, that our system doesn't then go out and bill the state for their portion. It automatically happens right now is that your contributions come in, and then our system says, okay, we need to go collect 20% from the state's fund, and we need to make sure that that doesn't happen. In terms of, for your employers, it's really, we're hoping that it's not going to be a huge change for them. Hopefully they're not going to have to change their systems. That's the goal, so it makes it really easy to implement for them. And then we'll report out how much of this overtime is actually have a separate report to know how much of this overtime is actually being used and accumulated, because I think the legislature wanted to know that as well. Of the known 370 LEF employers that could potentially be impacted by this change at some point, we don't know exactly how, who and how often these types of services get contracted out to LEF employers. We don't know of all of your LEF employers how many of them are actually doing this sort of thing. So we are contacting them to see, how many of them are going to do that, just so we get a sense of how broad the picture of this would be. And we're also working with stakeholders and associations. That's why we're here today, to kind of keep you up to speed and let you know that if you do have questions or your employers have questions, please contact either me or Marla at the Department of Retirement Systems. And we've also looped in the Association of Washington Cities. They've contacted us about, what the bill means and what they're going to have to do, and we want to use them as a communication conduit also to the cities that are employers for you guys, as another line of or channel of communication to get the word out to their people about how this is going to affect them. So for members, we really don't see this as being really any change at all. It's more for your employers, making sure that we segregate the amount what it should be, report it, and then don't go collect additional money from the states, the general fund, as we currently do for this type of overtime.
Sean, do you have a rough idea when that communication will be going out to employers?
We have already started some of the communications to the employers. We sent out a notice to employers, looks like it was around July 25th, end of last week, sort of telling them what was going on. So our employer services unit will continually sort of ping and send out notices to employers as we get the requirements nailed down about what they'll have to do and how they'll have to report it to us. So that communication is ongoing. Started, I think, last week.
Is there an expectation that the services that are kind of going on now, contract services that are going on now, like say for Mariners games, for instance,
right,
that you will be
sort of
retroing that?
I think that is the case because the bill is effective, so we're already in an effective period.
Yep. Okay.
So that technically those services we would have to segregate the contributions that came in for those ones.
And then, and you'll be working with the employers on
We will
how to
be
do
working
that
with
as well.
employers on how to do that. They already, when they send stuff, as employers send in contributions, there's a certain amount of sort of credits and debits that they have in their accounts. So I'm sure we'll just sort of work within that that framework that's already there. Sometimes they overpay, and so it floats, and then it covers an underpayment that just sort of naturally occurs.
Representative Holly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sean, good to see you.
Good to see you.
25 years ago, they just had a completely separate rate for off-duty employment out there. They separated overtime was overtime. You paid the Fair Labor Standards Act requirement for overtime, but off-duty was a completely separate rate. A lot of it was negotiated by the unions, the collective bargaining organizations. When the several cities took that over, they did with good reason about 20 years ago here, because they actually saw that the cost of the equipment, the insurance they're providing, the uniforms, everything that was going with this, transcended this. So all of a sudden they started taking this over, and they charge a given rate for off-duty employment, and there was a spread between that rate and the amount that was paid to the officers. They could cover their costs. I'm anticipating that most of the cities at this point will just increase the cost to the off-duty employers, so the cost will ultimately rest on the city. They're not going to have to pick this up for the off-duty employment. The people that are the customers out there will. Your thoughts?
I think if I understand your question, since an organization, a sponsor of an event, in some cases are probably required to have a presence for security or whatever, the cost, the normal operating cost of having an officer on the street with a car, whatever it takes, is X number of dollars. I believe that cost plus any overhead that the city would, if it were me, any overhead that the city may deem appropriate would be entirely transferred to the organization. Now, previously, I think that 20% of the state piece may not have been transferred over to the organization. It may have been. I don't really know. It depends on each individual contract between employer and this entity. But I think that the full freight of this would be transferred to, the Mariners or whoever it was that requested this service to fully fund it.
And just to follow up on that, the language in the budget specifically provides for that, specifically authorizes employers to do that.
Yeah.
Just wanted to touch on that. Follow up, Mr. Chair?
You actually had a question. What date, the exact date, does this actually go into effect?
This date was effective when the budget was effective, so it was the 23rd of, was it July? When did they, no, it was June. Whenever they passed the budget.
June 30th.
June 30th.
So July 1st would have been, yeah.
Correct.
So it's technically been effective.
In effect
so
now.
we're trying to catch up because it passed and it was effective before we even got it on Monday.
Very good, thank you. Any other questions for Sean?
One more.
Representative Hawley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on this is for the new people on the board. Some questions have been asked as to the hours worked here versus the increase in gross pay. What this will affect the final average salary, but this will not accelerate the vesting. In other words, if you work 160 hours overtime in a year, you don't get an extra month's worth of investment and accelerate what would normally be 12 months into 13.
No.
Thank you.
No. This will, it does go towards final average salary.
Correct.
If your employer deems that this is overtime eligible, then yep, it goes to your final average salary.
Yes, Adi?
Will these affect construction? Because at times, employers often use police officers or sheriff on construction site, either for road. Would these affect that at all?
If it was a contract negotiated between an employer and a contractor who is building a road or repairing, then and they deemed it was overtime, yes, it would. It's similar to the state patrol when there's, in my mind, it's similar to when the state patrol has or a company has a large load that has to transit across the state. They're required to have the state patrol presence with them as they go through the state highway, and the cost of that overtime, because it's off duty yet overtime, is borne by the transit company or the construction company. It would be really no different than a Mariners game or a rodeo where an officer was required or requested to be there.
So that means indirectly, this will actually increase the cost of government providing the basic service. Even though, yes, it doesn't affect the employee, which I think is a great thing, but government being in the business of constructing this road and awarding the contract to a contractor to build it, I mean, the contractor will recoup their cost. So this probably will increase the cost. Will you say that?
I'm not sure that I could say that with certainty because I'm not familiar with how all of the contracts are laid out currently with employers and event providers. If I don't know if they're already how much they're already collecting to pay for law enforcement services currently. I suspect that that's probably going on. I don't know, and I don't have the data to know if a particular city is already collecting enough to cover the 20% of the state's contribution to LEF. That's data that I don't know, so I can't really speak to whether or not that would be true or not. I couldn't say. I know that they're currently the cities are probably collecting it from these providers or event sponsors right now.
Thank you.
Well, I think I could say in regard to your, I think this is responsive to your question. This situation where the employer has to submit the full 50%, as I read the budget language, is limited to situations where the employer is providing additional service for an event. So I think in answer to your question, it kind of depends, like Sean was saying, on the contract. If the contract is you're going to use our enforcement officers for this purpose and you're going to reimburse us the cost, then the language authorizes the city or the local government to add that cost into what they're charging the contractor. If, on the other hand, it's just part of the ordinary course of business that you're doing, and I'm not sure how it's set up. If it's part of the ordinary course of business, then you wouldn't be getting the reimbursement and the event situation going on, so it just would be a normal contribution where the state would pay their 20% because it's just a regular employment. So I guess if in fact you're doing a separate event, which is what kicks in this language, the local government would have the authorization to include that cost as part of what they're part of the chargeback.
Thank you, Paul. Any other questions?
All right.
All right, then moving on to what was not included in the budget, which was more exciting than what was for the most part. There was a proposal in the original Senate budget to eliminate totally the state contribution to the left and put that all on the local governments. That did not see the light of day outside of the Senate. There was eliminating the employer contribution to the DRS expense fund. That was also didn't show up. Moving to the House budget, there was in the original House budget some language directing the board to study the question of including tribal officers in Left Plan 2, and there was some funds for additional legal expenses that would be associated with that inquiry. That proviso did not make it into the final budget, so that's not funded. There was a lot of discussion over the last couple of years about the possibility of merging Left Plan 1 with either Left Plan 2 or Tourist Plan 1. That did not appear in either budget, either as a proposal or as a final issue. And again, going back to the Senate, there was a proposal to redistribute the fire insurance premium tax. I think this is part of an overall effort to sweep up more funds. And that also did not show up in the final budget. Moving on to the bills affecting Left 2 that,
Question, White?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. On the tribal study, is the SCPP continuing their study, or?
I don't know the answer. The Select Committee on Pension Policy was expected to be asked to do a study on allowing tribal teachers into the TERS retirement system, and I don't know the final status of that as well.
Bills affecting Left Plan 2 that passed. The first one is resolution of an ongoing dispute regarding the status of hospital district EMTs in the Left Plan 2. The background to this, which I know some of you board members have heard ad nauseum, is when the EMTs were brought into Left Plan 2 in 2005, there was a question about whether the definition of employer and the definition of EMT included EMTs who worked for local hospital districts, which prior to that time, hospital districts had not participated in LEF. There was a initial Department of Retirement Systems decision that they were in fact mandated in. That decision was appealed. What came out of that process was a bill that addressed both the employee and employer concerns. So it clarified that there would be eligibility, but it would be prospective. Mandatory eligibility would be, number one, prospective from the effective date of the bill, and also it was limited to EMTs who actually performed emergency medical services. Because apparently there was an issue that there were employees in the hospital who, although they were certified as EMTs, didn't actually work as EMTs. So there's clarifying language to make sure this didn't sweep up people who weren't actually doing the work. And then it made much like when EMTs were first brought into LEF, there is an option for the people that qualified to pick up past service credit in LEF Plan 2 for EMT service back to 2005, which was the effective date of the original bill.
Are there any questions about that bill? Oh,
So does the employee pay the full actuarial cost of that? Or is the employer obligated to pay their fair share if the employee pays his or her share?
It's based on the actual what the contributions would have been had they been made at the time. So it's not the actuarial cost, it's the contributions.
no interest. And so, and they've got, employees have up to a year to decide whether they're going to purchase their past service, and then up to 5 years to pay for their past service, same as in the original bill back in 2005, and no interest. So for these members, the delay doesn't result in any additional cost to them compared to if they had been reported in LEF all along. They end up with an option whether they want the service or not. But if they do choose the service, they'll just pay the contributions that they would have paid if they'd been in all along.
So does this dispose of the lawsuit then?
Yes, the Hospital District Association has dismissed their lawsuit and their ongoing appeal at DRS both. So those, all of that's resolved now.
All right. The next bill, this affects actually not so much the plan as the board. This has to do with an issue that was brought up about military service credit, rights for interrupted military service credit. Under current law, if a LEF Plan 2 member is called up for military service, they have under federal law a right to pick up that service credit, but they have to pay the employee contributions they would have paid had they been working. The legislature made an exception to that where they waived employee but not employer contributions for interrupted military service credit for specified conflicts, provided the person received a campaign badge or medal, which, as I understand it, it's more complicated than this, but they have to be actually embedded in country to get the campaign badge or medal. So the question came up for people who were called up during these specified conflicts, but were not, we're stationed, say, in Washington, D.C. or something like that. Those people under the current law have to pay the employee contributions. And so the question that the legislature posed to the board to consider is whether that scope of that waiver of employee contribution should be expanded to include other people. Ryan's going to talk about that in more detail in the presentation later because we know that's on the board's agenda because the legislature told us so. And we have an obligation to report to the legislature by January 1st, 2018 on the results of that study.
Ryan will be talking about that, so we'll have a presentation and opportunity for questions on that one later.
The other piece was expanding the definition of veteran. I think this is one of those things that came out of, there must have been a specific issue. It expanded the documentation that was allowable in order to establish that the person was in fact a veteran under the definition of the statute, which keys into many different veterans benefits, including military service credit if it's interruptive. And I think that was one of those bills that was, to address this particular problem. Bills that were not passed, providing workers' compensation for PTSD for LEF members only. That was passed in the House, I believe, but did not get a hearing in the Senate. Property tax exemption for survivors of members killed in the line of duty. That was introduced but not heard by either house. Expanding the occupational disease presumptions for LEF members. I think that's a bill that's been out before. It was introduced but not heard. There were a couple more bills that were passed. Were not LEF Plan 2 bills, but were recommended by the Select Committee on Pension Policy and that did pass. One is the Washington State Patrol Retirement System allowing voluntary overtime. Reaching back into the dim past, there was a time when overtime was just automatically included for the State Patrol, just like it is for everybody else. There was an issue with some people who were perceived to be abusing that and sort of working additional overtime during their final compensation period. So I believe it was in the early 2000s, the legislature just said we're not going to include that in compensation for the state patrol anymore. So this bill kind of rolls that back and does allow, and this kind of voluntary overtime is much like what we were talking about earlier. This is troopers that are assigned to be present during construction projects and things like that. They let it back in, but they limit it to 70 hours per year. So that's a new provision. And the member contribution rate is increased to cover that. Public Safety Employees Retirement System full-time definition. This is a classic fixing something that went wrong bill. The Public Safety Employees Retirement System shares the characteristic with left that you have to be full-time to be into the system. Not enough that you do the work, you have to do it full-time. There were a number of employees that did the work and who were reported to DRS, and then it looks like it turned out that they were not meeting the DRS definition of full-time, which was 160 hours a month. And so they were going to kick them out, and they came back and passed this bill to sort of recognize that the contract actually considered full-time 140 hours per month. One condition of being able to retain your PSERS credit, because these are all people that were already reported in PSERS, so the money's already sitting in that pot. But to be able to retain it, you have to have been erroneously reported. So this doesn't allow people who weren't reported to pick up credit. It's just fixing an error. And that is it for the legislative update. I'd be happy to take any further questions. None?
All right, thank you, Paul. Our next item.
Mr. Chair, with your indulgence, before we got into the agenda, I neglected, we have 3 new members to the board, and I'd like to briefly introduce them and give them a chance to introduce themselves with your approval.
Absolutely.
Representing the Association of Cities and replacing David Klein on the board. David's term expired and he did not seek reappointment. Ade Arawula has been appointed to replace him. Ade, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Ade Arawula. I'm the finance director for City of Federal Way. I've worked a great deal with a lot of cities. I was finance director for City of Ellensburg for many years, for Chelan County for many years, for Kitsap County for many years. Currently, I'm a president for the Washington Finance Officers Association. I've served on the board of GFOA for many years before coming here. And on personal basis, I have 2 children. They're all grown, and I'm an empty nester, which is kind of refreshing. So it is. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. We also have here with us Representative Steve Bergquist. He's replacing Representative Kevin Vandewey on the board. Representative Bergquist, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you. Steve Bergquist, State Representative from the 11th District that represents South Seattle, Tukwila, Renton, and part of Kent. This is my 3rd term in the state legislature. I'm a high school social studies teacher by trade, so a TERS member turned PERS member, so dual member in our retirement system. I have a family background in firefighting. My father was 32 years with City Renton Fire Department, also a member of the Washington State Council of Firefighters. So growing up, going to conventions and learning about LEF was part of the life, actually. So very excited to be here and happy to contribute as a member.
Welcome. And then on the phone, we have the president of the Washington State Council of Firefighters, Dennis Lawson. Dennis is replacing Kelly Fox on the board. Kelly's term expired, and he did not seek reappointment. Dennis, would you like to introduce yourself to the board?
Yes, Steve. First of all, let me apologize for not being there, but I have a family trip planned, and I'm with about 7 colleagues from work on the east side of the state, where it's going to be 97 degrees today. So looking forward to a fun day over here. But I'm enjoying this conference call, and I wanted to say thank you for the opportunity. I joined the fire service in 1987 and have been involved in our local, either through the collective bargaining process, working through pension system issues, and have served on our board of state council since 2001. And by no means can I ever replace Kelly in any capacity. He's done a fantastic job. It's my hope to be part of a good group and work collectively with all of you. And it sounds like we've got a very interesting and intelligent group that we can probably work through some of these issues that we'll face in the next couple of years. So I'm honored to be with all of you, and appreciate the opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Mr. Chair, the next item on the agenda is the update from the State Actuary's Office. For the new members of the board, the left board uses the Office of the State Actuary to provide actuarial services to the board. That was a choice of the board to contract with OSA. And Lisa Wan, the Deputy State Actuary, is here today to kind of walk over with you what items are on your agenda, actuarial items are on your agenda, and how they'll be providing those. And with that, I will turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. As Steve mentioned, I'm Lisa Wan with the State Actuary's Office. And for the new members, some of the work that we do, we provide all the actuarial services for this board. And some of those services include consulting and educating on plan design, pension funding issues. We prepare actuarial analysis for any pension proposals you're considering. We also prepare the fiscal notes for any bills that go before the legislature that are related to pensions. And then we do two, what I consider pretty big topics, the actuarial valuation and experience studies, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So just before I even get started, there's no action required of the board today. This is really informational, so you can sit back and enjoy the actuarial information I'm about to share. So two main things I want to talk about: the actuarial valuation, and I've got a little bit of information to share, a little teaser information for you, and then talk about the economic experience study and get a little bit more into the details of experience studies in general, and then dive in a little bit into the economic experience study. And really the whole purpose of this presentation today is to prepare you for what you're going to see in, I expect, September. So it's really just getting the wheels going and getting you ready for having to make some decisions. So starting with the valuation, OSA prepares actuarial valuations on all the state retirement systems every year. We're only required to do them by statute every 2 years, but we do produce the valuations every year, and it gives us an opportunity to update the contribution rates based on new data. So we get to include the new data from the Department of Retirement Systems. We get to update the assets from the State Investment Board. We get to include any new legislation that may have passed. And that allows us to recalculate what are the contribution rates based on what has happened in this past year. It also allows us to check on the funding progress. So where are we at based on what's happened in the past? Where are we today at that measurement date? And are we on track with that systematic actuarial funding that's in statute? It also gives the actuary an opportunity to certify that the data, assumptions, and methods are reasonable. So every valuation, we actually look at how the experience has unfolded compared to the assumptions and make sure, yeah, everything still looks reasonable. It's not an in-depth study like the experience study, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, but it is a quick snapshot for us to have a look at that. And right now we are in the process of finalizing the June 30th, 2016 valuation, so it's still preliminary. A lot of the information is already up on our website for all the plans, so that would include LEF 2. Information would be up there on our website right now. We expect to finalize the valuation and have our full report up on the website by the end of August. And then we will be presenting results to you in probably September and have your individual valuation report. So we produce a report for all the Washington State retirement systems, and then we produce one independently for your board and prepare copies for each of you and for the staff. So this valuation that we're working on right now and that we're going to be presenting to you, and the reason there's no board action for the valuation is because this is considered an off-cycle valuation. So this is not the one that's required in statute. This is an off-cycle valuation, and it's not used for contribution rate setting. So it's really just, how are we doing? Let's check in on how things are going. The rates that have been adopted by the board last year in a rate setting cycle are good for the 17-19 biennium. So you already have rates adopted and in place for the 17-19 biennium. So a little bit of information to share with you. This table shows the numbers on the left are the 2015, so your last valuation results, and then we've marked them preliminary because it still isn't final yet, but just to give you an idea of where things are going. Your active membership has increased about 1%. Average salary has gone up, I think it's about 1.5%. Your average age and service for the plan has remained almost the same. And your annuitants really that's where you're going to see big increases as the plan continues to age and people are retiring from the system. So we've had about a 15% increase in your number of retirees. And then this table just shows how the assets have changed. This is just showing you the market value. When we present the results at an upcoming board meeting, we will get into the actuarial value of assets and how that's calculated. I know the board typically gets excited about working through those numbers. So just showing you the market value change from the last valuation to our preliminary one. The market value of assets has increased about 3.7%. A lot of that increase is coming from net inflow of money, so the contributions coming into your plan exceed the payments being made out of the plan. So $118 million excess there. Your investment returns positive, $244 million, but I will note if you look down on the last line, that's a 2.65% return on assets, and we are assuming 7.5%. So what you're going to see when we get into the actual results of the val at an upcoming meeting is that we had a loss on assets. So we were expecting the fund to return 7.5% for Left Plan 2, but we had 2.65%. Next year looks better. So next steps for the valuation, that was just a little teaser with some of the information. At an upcoming meeting, we will give you a lot more information on the valuation results. We are still finalizing everything, the liabilities, the funded status, which is always an interesting number to see, and the contribution rates that come out of it. Again, although you won't be adopting them, we do still share that information. And as I mentioned, we will have a final report for the board this fall. And even though we will be presenting at an upcoming meeting on this information, there still will be no board action for the valuation. So before I move into the experience studies, any questions on the valuation? All right. So
Lisa, one quick thing. Will you be comparing in the valuation? Will you be comparing the experience to what you were expected for some of those issues as well?
So when we present valuation results every year, we typically only share the experience of the investment returns. We don't typically get into all the details about, what was termination experience versus what we expected and what mortality, et cetera. But that information is in the val report. If that's something of interest to the board, I'd be happy to go into that or even put that into the presentation if you'd be interested. We do, that's our what we call gain loss.
Yeah.
Right? So gains or losses on experience versus assumptions. And there are tables in the valuation every year that disclose the gains and losses.
Thank you.
Yes. So the next work product I'd like to talk about is experience studies. And the valuation, actuarial valuation that I just talked about in our office, we kind of call that our bread and butter. That's like the work product that almost everything stems from. So once we prepare an actuarial valuation, all of our pricing comes off of that. Any of our projections for future contribution rates come from that valuation. It's kind of like our bread and butter. Experience studies sort of feed into the valuation. So we prepare experience studies on two key areas, and I'll go into each of those briefly and one more in depth. But the real purpose of doing an experience study is it allows us an opportunity to do an in-depth review. So not just that annual quick check on the gains losses, but an in-depth review of the assumptions compared to experience, and if those assumptions remain reasonable or should be changed. So how do they compare to what the experience has been? How do they compare to what we now think the future might look like? And do we need to change them? So that's really the purpose of an experience study, looking into all of those assumptions that are in the valuation to see if they remain reasonable. All actuarial services also have to follow our professional standards of practice, actuarial standards of practice, and those standards require that assumptions take into account relevant historical and current data, economic data, and also that they reflect the actuary's best estimate of future expectations. So our standards of practice also require us to be reviewing these assumptions on a regular basis. And the whole reason is because if your assumptions for your plan are reasonable, they're going to contribute to reasonable funding. So if you have appropriate funding levels, it helps you manage risks. If you have inappropriate funding levels, so for example, if you wanted to be very, really push that investment return assumption, we're going to expect 9% instead of 7.5%. Well, then your contribution rates are all determined based on you're assuming you're going to earn 9%. So contribution rates go down, and if you're not earning 9%, which chances are pretty good you're not, based on our analysis, then you've been underfunding that plan that whole time that you've been making contributions based on an assumed 9% return. So then you aren't properly funding that plan. So that's the reason that it's important to be looking at our assumptions and reviewing them regularly and setting them at a reasonable level so we can ensure reasonable funding of the plans. It also is really important in managing risks. So if we take a step back, what is the purpose of a pension? It's a promise to pay future lifetime benefits. Well, we don't know what the future holds. We don't know what that future is going to look like. So we have to estimate. We have to estimate what future benefits are going to be, how long people are going to work. And as we know, making assumptions about the future involves uncertainty and risk. And when assumptions are wrong, the plan could be either underfunded or overfunded. It can go either way if your assumptions are wrong. And the question is, what side of risk do you want to be on, right? So right now we have a 7.5% return for LEF 2. If, for example, the return was 9%, and we were underfunding the plan, or if it was 6%, we'd be overfunding the plan from our perspective. And what side do you want to be on? If you had a choice of underfunding or overfunding the plan, what side would you want to be on, right? Well, we want to be really close to neither. We want to be as close to what's actually going to happen as possible, but we also want to be a little bit on the right side of that risk. And also just, another thing, it's not symmetrical. The risk of what's going to happen with the 9% assumption versus 6% assumption is not symmetrical. So again, another reason, another component that we take into account when we're setting that best estimate assumption. So for example, if our best estimate is 7.5%, the risk of, and say that is the 50th percentile, the risk of being at the 55th percentile is not the same as the risk of being at the 45th. So sometimes that might move us more towards that 45th than the 50th. So a little bit of fun stuff. And also, too, an important component of risk management is balance. And you'll hear me talk about balance in other areas, too. And so, again, talking about that return assumption, if you wanted to really limit the risk of your investment return assumption and say 6.5%, say we want to go 6.5%, that has other outcomes. So yes, you will be limiting the investment risk. You will be limiting the risk that there isn't enough money to pay benefits in the future, right? But that comes with a cost. Lower investment return means higher contributions. If you're expecting your assets to earn less, you need to be contributing more to that fund to get to that same number at the end. And that higher contribution rate impacts state and local government budgets, also impacts member take-home pay. So if you kind of think, you know, it's really like a scale, right? And you're trying to balance these different risks, right? What it's going to cost to fund the plan versus the risk of being underfunded. So with all that background on risk, the State Actuary's Office, we perform two different types of experience studies, economic and demographic. The economic experience study is the one we're working on right now. That's the one we will be presenting to you in September. We do that experience study every 2 years. So every 2 years, we're stepping back, looking at those economic assumptions like investment returns, general salary increases, and inflation, and making sure that the assumption is still reasonable. Now, we are required in statute to perform that economic experience study every 2 years for the Pension Funding Council, but the Pension Funding Council does not make the assumption adoptions for LEF Plan 2. They address all other retirement systems, but the LEF 2 board addresses the LEF Plan 2 assumptions. And so the LEF 2 board has typically just followed that Pension Funding Council timeline. The PFC receives our recommendation September 1, and they have to make their decision by October 31st. So we typically follow the same timeline with LEF 2. And the economic assumption will include some plan-specific data, but economic assumptions are largely focused around national and regional economic data. And there's a table in the appendix that just shows some of the sources that we use when we're studying the economic assumptions. The demographic experience study, which I'm just going to touch on here once and then set it aside for the rest of this presentation, it's performed at least every 6 years. So at least once every 6 years, we do the demographic experience study, which is a very massive report because it's studying all of the other assumptions like termination rates, mortality rates, retirement rates. And we study 30 to 50 years of historical plan data. Because our plans are so large, we're able to use the experience of our plans in most situations. So the next study we are scheduled to complete in 2019, which means we start that next year. So experience studies consider both past and future experience. So as I mentioned, we analyze historical data. We also review projections for the future, and sometimes that includes collaborating with other state agencies. So, for example, the Economic and Revenue Forecast Council, we work with them on expectations for future economic assumptions. And then we also look at conditions that created certain experience. So it's not just a straight mathematical calculation of, oh, here's the historical data and average it, and here's the assumption. That's not how it works. We actually look at all of the data by year Does something stand out? Does something look unusual? What caused it? Is that a cause we would expect to happen in a typical cycle? So do we keep it in? Do we throw it out? So it's a pretty detailed and exhaustive process. And then we take the past experience, our expectations for the future, which are based on an actuary's professional judgment along with data that we gather from other sources to develop a single point best estimate. So in the past, if you've been involved in actuarial work for several years, actuaries used to set ranges for an assumption, but that's no longer acceptable under our standards of practice, so now it's a single point best estimate assumption. And it comes down to a mix of art and science. That's the part I like about it, adding a little bit of art in there. So for LEF Plan 2, there are 3 economic assumptions you will be seeing in September with recommendations from our office, and that will be the rate of inflation, rate of general salary increases, and the rate of investment return. And those help us estimate the future benefits payable from the plans because benefits are based on salary. Today's value of those benefits, so we discount them with that rate of return assumption. And then the resulting contribution rates needed to fund those future benefits. So for inflation, it's mainly used for the cost of living adjustments, post-retirement cost of living adjustments for your plan. So retirees from LEF 2 receive a COLA on their retirement benefit that's based on the regional CPI inflation, and it is capped at 3% but has banking. The current assumption is 3%, and that includes 2 components. So we study national inflation, and then we add an adjustment for regional because it is the regional CPI that's used. General salary increases, this is representing one component of salary increase, which is what we consider total inflation and productivity. So salaries will increase each year based on what we expect, total inflation plus productivity. And then the second component, which is part of the demographic experience study, and that's promotions and merit step increases. So we're talking just general across-the-board salary increases when we're doing this assumption. Currently, the assumption is 3.75%, and it includes, as I mentioned, inflation and productivity. And the third economic assumption we will be reporting on is the investment return, probably the most significant assumption when it comes to pension funding. It is reflective of what we expect the assets to earn in the future, and it is used to determine the present value. So we take all these projected benefit payments, we discount them all to today, we take all the projected salaries, we discount them to today, and that's how we figure out the contribution rate. The current assumption is 7.5% for LEF Plan 2. Right now it's 7.7% for all the other retirement systems. And inflation is made up of investment return is made up of national inflation plus real rate of return. How they interact, we really see the economic assumptions as a set and that they must be consistent. You'll see in a minute how inflation is underlying all 3 of these assumptions. So it's really important to consider and adopt assumptions consistent with each other. And this graph just shows how inflation is part of each of these assumptions. So total inflation is national with that Seattle adjustment, investment return, inflation with real rate of return, and general salary growth includes the regional adjustment because we are based on our salaries here in this area, plus productivity. So when we come to you in September, we will be recommending an entire set of economic assumptions that are consistent with each other. If we have no changes to recommend to the board, then that means that our best estimate, it matches the current assumptions. If we're recommending changes, it means our best estimate is materially different than the current assumptions for the plan. And whenever there's a change in assumptions, there likely is a fiscal impact. So we can share that with you as well. And again, going back to the earlier slide on risk, it's really important to have your assumptions as close to expectations as possible so that you're funding at the right level and you can manage some of those risks. And if there are any changes to the assumptions that are recommended, and if the board adopts any changes to the assumptions, those will go into the 2017 valuation, so the next actuarial valuation, and that's the one that's used for rate setting. So just to wrap up, we will be coming back to you in September with, I'm not sure if we'll be doing the valuation results then, but definitely the economic experience study. And as I mentioned, there will be no board action needed for the valuation, but there will be board action to adopt the economic assumptions. And we will have much more detail when we bring those recommendations to you. And that's the end of my prepared remarks. I'm happy to take any more questions.
Thank you, Lisa. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hi, this is Dennis. I just got just a comment.
Dennis, can you hold on just a second and we'll go to you after Ade?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Wan, thank you for what you do. I can't predict the future, but that seems to be what you do, so thank you.
We try.
For your next report, I was just wondering, following up with what Mr. Nelson pointed out or asked or mentioned earlier, is maybe at your next presentation, if we could see your estimate compared to actual performance, which I think will help the board to determine, either to agree with you with changing the assumption. Will that be possible?
That's exactly what we will be bringing. So when we come to make recommendations on economic assumptions, we actually will have tables that show historical experience and compared to the assumptions that were used, okay. And then also any data on expectations for the future in regards to those assumptions. Yes, okay. You should have all of the data and numbers and information you need to make a decision, is my goal.
Okay, thank you very much.
Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to ask kind of for the same information for the new board member. I think would be helpful. And so I think the request is perfect, so I'll look forward to seeing that. And then secondly, when I did a couple hours with the left board as an orientation, I had the chance to meet your office staff, and I just wanted to say, Lisa, you have a great group of people working with you, and I applaud everything you guys are doing. It seems like a nice place to be associated with. And I had also the opportunity to see some of your presentations regarding Left 1, Left 2, the Left 1 TERS, and all the information that you compiled and presented, and thoroughly impressed. So I'm looking forward to continue working with you.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, there will also be just sort of another piece of information. There will also be a full report produced on the economic assumptions, and along with that, we also produce a report on financial condition for the retirement systems. So I expect that will come to you before even our presentation.
Any more questions for Lisa? All right, thank you, Lisa. As always, great report.
Mr. Chair, the next item on the agenda is 2017 interim planning. Ryan will be doing this presentation. By way of background, there are kind of roughly 3 categories of issues that Ryan will be talking about today. That includes issues that the board discussed last year and chose to defer until this interim issues that came up during the legislative process and other new issues. With that, I will turn it over to Ryan. This part of the presentation, though, particularly for the new members, this is where we'll be getting direction from you on what you want us working on for this interim, and it's kind of a compressed interim. So please feel free to ask questions of Ryan and me throughout this, and then we'll be looking for direction from you on what you want us to work on. And with that, Ryan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Steve, members of the board. For the record, Ryan Frost, board staff, and this is the 2017 interim planning presentation. As Steve mentioned, I'll break it up into a few different categories. The first is the actuarial information you'll be receiving this interim. Lisa hit on the first and third in more detail than I ever could, so I'll leave those alone. The second one, though, is an update on the cost of benefit improvements, and it's been over a decade since the board requested any pricing on benefit improvements, and there's been a little bit of pressure from members to find out what those benefits would cost today. So our hope is to put together a list of the most requested improvements and get those over to the actuary's office to get priced, and those will be presented later on in the interim. One of them we know for sure because we get asked all the time is what a multiplier increase would cost.
By way of background, for virtually all of you, because even the more experienced members on the board have not been on the board for 12 years. I think you're the only one, Mark. But it originally, when the board was created, there was quite a bit of pressure on board members and the associations representing the plan members to improve benefits. And so one of the first activities that the board went through was sort of a systematic outlining of what those benefit improvements are, and then worked with the state actuary's office to get those priced. And that actually took virtually the entire interim 12 years ago. And so things like what would it cost to improve the multiplier from 2% to 3% or to 2.5%? And what if it was prospective only or retroactive, and changing the final average salary period or changing survivor benefits? All of those were priced. And then what would happen, it's one of the features that's actually in my job description, is to educate the plan members about the costs of those benefit improvements, manage their expectations. So to the extent that when I'm asked to go out and speak to groups like WACOPS or the State Council of Firefighters, then as those questions come up, then I can, and still do, because those questions come up, they've already come up at the meetings I've been at this year, about will the board be recommending a 3% multiplier, and what's the cost of that? Now, again, since, as Ryan mentioned, the last time those were officially priced by the state actuary's office was 12 years ago. So I can talk about them, but the information, the data, is stale. A lot of the assumptions and a lot of the experience in the plan has changed. So this was an issue that you talked about last interim and decided to defer to this interim. And so the question that we'd be asking you is this something now that you want us to work on this interim, sort of going through and refreshing or updating that pricing that was done by OSA for the board back in 2004 mostly?
Mr. Chair,
Mike?
I would like to move that we review this during our work this interim.
I'll second that. This is Dennis.
Okay, we have a second. Any discussion? Questions? Representative Hawley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is something that's necessary. We've got, a dozen years ago, we did do this. And ever since the beginning, when we had the meeting, Snoqualmie passed, that we decided to move forward with Initiative 790. The whole push behind it was that we were looking for maybe one or more marquee benefit increases. We've seen an amazing volume of benefit increases here that have been peripheral. We haven't had that one marquee benefit increase. And so there's a whole new generation of firefighters and officers out there that really don't know the work that we did back then and understand the cost and like Steve's talking about, in order to manage expectations again, we need those numbers in front of us so they actually understand the impact. And it's not just an academic or philosophical conversation among members out there, that we have some hard facts to put in front of them. So this is necessary at this time.
Any further discussion? Go ahead, Mark.
Question about the workload capacity, because it is going to be a relatively short interim.
That is a fair question. To be honest, most of the workload impact on this will fall on the state actuary's office. And the plan is not to deviate from the types of information that was asked in the past, simply to kind of ask the same questions, just get updated answers. That being said, we have had discussions with the Office of the State Actuary's Office, and in this compressed interim, there is no way that they will be, could reasonably be expected to recreate all the work that was done. That was probably 7 or 8 board meetings that it was done on back in 14 time frame. So what we would probably do is hit the top ones, if you will, this interim, and get as much done as we can this interim, and then what can't be done this interim will come back to you again next interim and see if you want to continue that.
To hit on Representative Holy's point a little bit, if it would be helpful for the board, I can also go back to the board's inception, look at the bills that we have passed for benefit improvements and the fiscal notes that were attached to those to put alongside whatever we get priced out, if that would be helpful.
I think that would that would be helpful, especially given the number of questions that I got, along with Director Nelson. I got a lot of the same questions, as I'm sure some of my colleagues here do. I think that'd be very beneficial because, again, the level of education when it comes to what benefits are there and what's happened and what hasn't happened, that'd be great to be able to have that on a piece of paper.
Okay, will do. So any other questions about the actuarial topics that are on this interim?
Yep. We have a motion on the table?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, sorry, I was calling for a motion.
Seconded.
Okay.
So a vote would be appropriate.
Okay. All right, if discussion is complete, let's go ahead and take a vote. All in favor? Aye. Aye?
Aye.
Aye. Against? All right, motion passes.
Go ahead and continue, Ryan.
Okay, I'll move
Thank
on to the next section, which are potential topics for this interim. As Paul mentioned in his ledger update, we do have the interrupted military service credit study, which is required. So we'll be doing that. The first presentation will be directly after this one. And so then there's potential topics. The first one is a presumption for PTSD. As Paul also mentioned in his ledger update, there was a House Bill, House Bill 1655, that passed but ultimately died in the Senate. And basically what a presumption means is that the disease or illness they contract is presumed to come from their work as a Left 2 member for workers' compensation purposes. So that's one topic that you guys could dig into a little bit more this interim if you want to.
On this topic, there would be two potential ways that historically the board has always used whatever is determined by Labor and Industries to be duty-related, then is also considered duty-related for purposes of Left 2 pension benefits. So there was legislation last session that would have created a presumption that Left 2 members suffering from PTSD, that it's related to their Left 2 work for L&I purposes. That bill didn't pass. If it had passed, it would have also rippled into Left 2, because if it would have been duty-related for L&I, it would have also been duty-related for purposes of Left 2 disability benefits. If there is any study work done on this by the Department of Labor and Industries, historically we have and will continue to help them staff in terms of information and background on what we're aware of, what data we have. In the past, the board has also studied separately related types of issues, such as what are other states doing with respect to this for their pension plans, what national studies about this issue are out there. It doesn't necessarily mean that it would lead to a recommendation for legislation, but those are the types of sort of, if you will, L&I issues that the board has studied or worked on in the future. That's how they've kind of gone under that type of approach. Then go ahead and continue on.
Okay. So the second potential topic is catastrophic retiree health care. And so for this issue, currently there's an inconsistency in how health care is administered between catastrophic retirees and the surviving spouses of Left 2 members. Catastrophic retirees do not have access to PEB, surviving spouses do. And that was mostly due to there being concerns when the bill was passed about the lack of data on how many members would qualify now and in the future for catastrophic retirement. Although in many cases, due to the ability to choose their own health care, the catastrophic retirees actually can purchase a better health care plan than the surviving spouses get. So there's a bit of inconsistency there, and it's one of the solutions for the board would be to, if you want to address that inconsistency and get catastrophic retirees and surviving spouses on the same level of benefits as regards to their health care.
This is an issue in working with the Department of Retirement Systems as interim. This is one that they brought to the attention of, to our attention. Both the surviving spouse medical benefits bill and the catastrophic disability bill, those were both Left 2 board recommended bills. When the catastrophic disability bill was originally proposed to provide medical for them, the original approach was the same as the surviving spouses: provide them access to the state medical plan PEB for them and their families. At that time, the Health Care Authority had some concerns about adding catastrophic disability retirees to the PEB pool. They weren't sure how many there were going to be because it was a brand new bill, and they weren't sure what their average costs were going to be for those types of members. As you might well expect, members who are catastrophically disabled probably have higher than average medical costs, but they also have shorter than average lifespans. So there's kind of a balance then that's done there. The way the ultimate solution was not to move them into PEB and to allow them the opportunity to purchase their own health care insurance on the open market up to the amount of their COBRA coverage, whatever they had from their individual employer. And that creates the inconsistency that Ryan's talked about. COBRA coverage, the amount of COBRA coverage from employer to employer is slightly different. So each catastrophic disability retiree has slightly different capacity to get health care insurance for them and their family. They don't have access to PEB, and because the amount of COBRA is higher than the original premiums, many of them can afford to buy healthcare insurance that's actually at least more expensive than PEB. I don't want to necessarily say better, but it's more expensive than PEB. That's raised this question about consistency. Is what we would be working through if you chose to work on this topic is providing you more data and more background on what this issue is, and then finding out from you, is this a concern? And then we could research potential options for addressing whatever concerns come out of that. But it would, and this would, in all likelihood, require legislation to change if you end up going down that path. Questions?
Michael?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Questions for Steve or Ryan. When you say open market, is that just any open market, or is it specific to the benefit exchange?
No, it's any open market. So, for instance, some of our catastrophic disability retirees don't even live in the state, and so they're purchasing healthcare benefits, healthcare insurance in a different state, but they're limited by their COBRA amounts for their employment when they were disabled here in Washington. That creates administrative issues for DRS in terms of tracking them individually because the COBRA amounts are different for each person. And then DRS reimburses those insurance expenses, so it also requires them to work with potentially a different insurance provider for every single catastrophic retiree that's out there. But those would be the kind of issues that we would be providing you more information about if you want to work on this topic.
Follow-up question.
Go ahead, Michael.
So then for those out-of-state retirees, would they, I mean, I know I'm talking about a theoretical here, but would the plans be, I mean, could they receive the state's PEB or some other plan? Does the insurance, is PEB covered outside of the state? Or?
Yes, that'd be part of what we'd be talking about too, is whether PEB would work as a alternative for all the catastrophic retirees. Ade?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With this study, will we also be looking at the funding? So when we study the benefit, come up with alternative or options of funding, or how we're going to fund these benefits? Okay.
Yeah, we'd be looking at that in terms of how the cost to the fund currently compares for the COBRA amounts that are paid versus what would be the cost to the fund if PEB were provided to them. And conversely, we would also be working with Healthcare Authority to find out what the cost they would expect to the PEB fund if they took on catastrophic retirees.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll move on to the third potential topic then, if no more discussion, and that's retirees recovering from disabilities. This is an issue that has come up in recent conversations with DRS. And basically the issue is that the current policy is that when a member is determined by DRS to be recovered from their disability, that member's previous employer is required to hire them back. But there are some issues that arise when the employer does not agree with DRS's decision that the member has fully recovered from their disability. And so this will leave the member in limbo where DRS has stopped paying their disability benefit, but their employer won't hire them back. So while it's on appeal, technically the member could be without any source of income during that period. Now there is one member that we know of out there this is happening to, and DRS is actually continuing to pay his disability while it's on appeal. But that is not set in rule anywhere that they are required to do that.
So again, if you chose to work on this issue, we'd be providing more detail about what this issue is and the alternatives for addressing it. DRS has sort of come up with an administrative fix for this one particular case, But as Ryan mentioned, there's no guarantee that that would continue in the future. And, you know, what are the implications, anyway, of that administrative fix? Is that something that you guys would like more information on? That's we're not sure at this point in time whether this one would require legislation or not. We'd end up working with DRS and their AGs to figure that out. That would be part of the report process on this issue.
Okay. The last potential topic is the retiree return to work issue. And so this issue's been around it's been popular for about 5 years. The board first started working on this particular issue in 2013 when we learned that some Left 2 retirees were using the 2005 career change law to work as a law enforcement officer or firefighter while continuing to collect their pension. A little bit of background on that bill was that before 2005, Left Plan 2 retirees' pension stopped if they went to work in any job covered by any statewide public retirement system, so PERS, TERS, PSERS, anything like that. So the board, though, recognized that members could age out of left positions before they're ready or could afford to leave the workforce. So in the 2004 interim and then in the 2005 session, the board proposed a legislation that would enable a retired Left Plan 2 member to start a second career in non-left public employment, and they could either opt into their new job's pension system and stop collecting their Left 2 pension check, or more commonly, they would go to work in public employment, opt out of PERS, TERS, PSERS, or whatever, and then collect their Left 2 pension. The board did propose a bill in 2014 that attempted to tighten up this career change law a little bit to keep the Left 2 retirees from working in a historically Left 2 covered position while they collected their pension, but that bill did not pass.
Yeah, for those of you who were around in 2014, what the board bill, the process that the board went through at that time, we identified several, for lack of a better word, and I don't mean this to be offensive to anybody on the board, loopholes that were being used by employers or members or jointly to kind of skirt the career change requirements. So, for instance, a police chief is historically a left position. And if you were hired as a police chief, you could not collect your left pension. But if the employer and the member they wanted a particular individual and they wanted him to get his left check and his salary as a police chief, they would perhaps structure the job description to say, well, it's not a full-time job. A full-time job is 160 hours a month, and this job only requires 159 hours a month. That was a real-life example. And so therefore, it's not a left job, it's a PERS job, and they can then opt out of PERS, as Ryan described, and get their left check. So the board's recommended bill back in 2014 sort of went through all of those, there are other loopholes that were being used and closed them down. That, though, then created some other issues. So, for instance, some of the employers were concerned that this made it harder to recruit left retirees into some of these chief positions. That also was an issue for some of the members as well, in the sense that does this now force our employers to hire chiefs from out of state, or at least give the out of state candidates a competitive advantage because they can take less salary maybe, or because their out of state pension isn't affected. That, if you chose to work on this issue, it would be we would start with a refresher of what was going on, what those loopholes were, what was proposed, some of the issues that arose out of that. And I think it's also fair, Ryan said it's been being discussed now for several years. The issue has sort of changed over time. Initially, when it came up, it tended to be sort of more of a top-down approach, where it was primarily chief positions, police and fire, where this was going on. Now, there are employers out there, some large left employers, where the entire executive staff is non-left employees. So it's expanded beyond chiefs probably to at least the next level down. And we're also starting to see the issue pop up at the bottom level too. So if a position is not full-time, it's not eligible for left. So employers are looking to say, well, we'd rather hire 2 part-time employees and have them in PERS rather than hire 1 full-time employee that's in left. And then that way we can bring back these retired left members as sort of part-time firefighters or part-time law enforcement officers and keep them from they could still get their pension and this part-time salary. That's a fairly new phenomenon as well, but we would be providing you with the data regarding these issues and then working on potential solutions. And again, it would take legislation. Initially, back in 2014, the board was very concerned with public perception, that there were articles in the paper about the abuses going on at the plan and or that the plan was somehow being abused and that was creating costs for taxpayers, for instance. There hasn't been that kind of press the last 2 years. So to some extent, this issue, there's not like a poster case for it right now, as there maybe was back in 2014. But I think it's still very much going on. But anyway, that's what we'd be working on with this issue. We'd be happy to answer any other questions that you have.
Questions for Steve?
Before we move off of this list, I don't want to lose for the board, for us to begin working on any of these 4 issues, it would require a motion. So now would be the time for you guys to discuss amongst yourselves whether you want us, whether you, and then by extent us, want to work on any of these issues in the interim.
Go ahead, Mark.
Sure, I'll make a motion that we direct the staff to work on the catastrophic retiree health care and retirees recovering from disabilities.
All right. Any discussion on that? Clarification? So just those 2, Mark?
Just those 2 are the motion, yes.
Okay. Go ahead, Mike.
Just a question for Steve on time management.
Yeah, we can handle those even in the compressed interim.
Okay. Motion's been seconded. I'll put it to a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Are folks on the phone there? He's still there. Dennis, you there? Senator Warnick? Did we lose him?
But we still have a quorum here, and
Yeah, I just want to make sure that if they were there, they had a chance.
This is Dennis. I'm still online.
Okay, Dennis, we just went for a vote. Did you hear the motion that was made?
I did. I must have been trying to talk at the same time somebody else may have been. I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you. All right. Motion passes. Okay.
And then, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, move on to the last section here, which is the administrative section. The first is there's a DRS rulemaking partnership that staff and team members over at DRS have been working on. We're just about finished with our first rule, which is clarifying some of the disability WACs, and we're hoping to move on to the next rule within the next couple weeks. Second issue is the financial audit. The board's expenditures are routinely audited, and so that will be happening this interim as well. Third, the Department of Retirement Systems and Washington State Investment Board each make annual presentations to the board. DRS will touch on how the administration of the plan is going. SIB will talk about how the assets are either accumulating or decreasing for the fund. For October, we're still planning on that being an off-site strategic planning meeting for the board to set strategic goals for the future. And then lastly, there's the annual AG training on the docket for this interim as well. That will be presented by Tor.
This part of the interim preview doesn't require action on part of the board. These are regularly scheduled items, and we'll keep you updated on all of them. The one piece is the October offsite, and I'll be talking to you about that later on the future agenda items and getting board direction at that time on that topic. But are there any questions about any of these items? Ade?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the financial audit, will you tell me a little bit more about that? Do we have audit committee? How does that go?
So the staff hires an outside auditor to come in and audit the board's expenditures just to make sure everything lines up with how we've put them out to DES.
Yeah, usually, Ade, the board is a small state agency, and so all state agencies are periodically audited by the state auditor. When the board was created, though, there was a separate requirement in statute that the board have a financial audit every year. Usually for a small state agency, we might normally expect to be audited, say, once every 6 years by the state auditor. But because of that statutory requirement, if we're not being audited by the state auditor, we contract. And so there is we go out to bid for that, and there's an accounting firm usually that comes in, does the audit of expenses, then makes a presentation to the board on the results of that audit. But there is no separate audit committee at this time for the board.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. And if not, I will, with Steve's blessing, I'll move into the next topic.
Not mine, the board's. But
Yes.
are there any final questions for Ryan before he moves on? The interrupted military service credit study, as Paul mentioned earlier, and this is a required study by the board. It was required in the final budget. There was no appropriation with respect to the study, but we also don't expect that an appropriation would be necessary to do this. With that, I'll turn it over to Ryan, and then we'll answer questions as we go.
Yeah. If there's any questions throughout the presentation, please stop me and ask. So this issue, veterans who served during a designated conflict period but did not earn a campaign badge or medal must pay the member contributions to receive Left 2 credit for periods of interrupted military service. Now, a little bit of background on that is that Left Plan 2 members may establish up to 5 years of either free or paid service credit for military service interrupting their left service. Now, there are some exceptions to that rule. The way DRS administers it, you can actually earn 5 years of free and 5 years of paid military, so 10 total. But again, there's a 5-year max for each type, free or paid. Member contributions are waived for Left 2 members who serve in the military either during wartime or during that specified conflict where they earn a campaign badge or medal. And again, this issue comes from the legislature. They directed the board to study if members of Left 2 who are veterans of these specified conflicts, but it's outside of a period of war, and they did not were not awarded a campaign badge or medal. Will they also can they also receive this free 5 years service credit? How much it'll cost? There'll be a few questions at the end that I'll get to that we'll hopefully discuss and have answers to this interim.
This meeting today is the initial presentation for the new board members. This is just to sort of introduce you to what the issue is. You will have this on the agenda again at least 2 more times this interim. A preliminary follow-up where Ryan will go into much more detail about the different issues and pieces of this with background data as it becomes available, cost data as it becomes available, legal analysis from the AGs as required and as it becomes available. And then typically in December, if it turns out that legislation is necessary, it'll be on, there'll be a final presentation to give you the opportunity to decide at that time whether you want to recommend legislation. So for today, this is mainly a familiarizing you with what this issue is, where it came from.
Yeah. So service credit is one of the factors used in computing left members' retirement benefit. So increasing your service credit would increase your future monthly benefit. Now, a member can purchase interrupted military service credit only if the member leaves a Left Plan 2 covered employment to render military service in one of the armed or uniformed services of the United States. They also, upon termination of that military service, must initiate Left Plan 2 into Left Plan 2 covered employment within 90 days. And then for required contributions, they must pay the required member contributions within 5 years of that reemployment or retirement, whichever comes first. And those contributions are based on the compensation the member would have received had they not gone out on interruptive military leave. And those member contributions have no interest applied to them, but the employer and state contributions do have interest applied to them. And let's get back to a little bit of the issues that member contributions are waived if the member is defined as a veteran in statute. That statute limits veterans to persons who are serving during a period of war, which is defined as World War I, World War II, the Korean conflict, the Vietnam era, the Persian Gulf War, or any future period of war declared by Congress, or they must be in a specified military operation where they earn that campaign badge or medal, and the Department of Defense will award a campaign badge or medal to members who served during a specified conflict. And I have a list of those in the report on page 3 in the footnotes. I can list them off if you guys want and questions. And the key point is that they have to be stationed in a designated war zone. Now, here's kind of where the hang-up is. Members can still serve in a specified conflict, but if they're not actually in the war zone on the ground, they will not get that badge or medal, and therefore they will not get that free military service credit. So what the legislature is asking us to look at is if a member is part of this conflict, but they're not actually on the ground, what will it cost to give those members free service credit as well? Again, it's a legislative directive to study this. Staff will be working with the Select Committee on Pension Policy to prepare a final report to present to the legislature at the end of the interim. That's due, I think, January 1st, 2018. A few of the questions we hope to answer over the course of the study process is, one, should the member contributions for this type of service be waived? And if the waiver of these contributions were expanded to include these members, how many additional members would become eligible for the waiver? How many members who had already paid contributions for military service would be eligible for a refund? And what will be the cost to Left Plan 2? And then also what other states are doing as it applies to interrupted military service credit. What states will give for free? Most of them follow USERRA, which is the national guideline, and Washington State does as well.
The Select Committee on Pension Policy was not included in the legislation, but at their first meeting of the year, we talked to them about the fact that the original bill for interrupted military service was a joint Left 2 Select Committee bill, and that the underlying statute regarding military service and the campaign medal requirement is a statute that applies to all the plans, not just Left 2. So the Select Committee chose to go ahead and study this issue with respect to all the other plans during this interim as well. And Ryan will be coordinating with their policy analyst on this issue throughout the interim, with the idea that if legislation is recommended, the one goal might be to have it be a bill that applies to all the plans, and it would be joint Left 2 Select Committee legislation recommendation as well.
Right. The definition of veteran is not just a Left 2 definition. It falls under all the plans, so it would require, for amend the definition of veteran, it would include all the plans. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any more questions.
Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not so much a question on the bill or the study itself, but kind of on the initiation of reemployment on the 90-day window. And I guess I'm not necessarily expecting you guys to have this answer right now, but is that typically with the employer that they left, or is it with another employer? I mean, I see an issue of if it's either with a new employer or if they have to go through the entire hiring process with their previous employer, that can often take greater than 90 days. I mean, I know certainly for the fire service it can, just the timing of different steps of the application period. You know, I can imagine for law enforcement it could be even greater with a more thorough background check. So
We'll make sure that we include that in the next report as part of the background to that, as far as how that 90-day reemployment window is working now.
Great, thank you.
Question for you, Ryan. What's the current definition that the state uses for a veteran?
It's in statute. I'd have to pull it up. I could get back to you after the meeting with it.
It's not simply just a DD 214. It's I imagine there's more to it than that.
It's a very long definition.
It is, okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
The DD 214 is part of it. That's the report that you get for being honorably discharged. That's a part of the requirement in order to be a veteran, is that you be honorably discharged for certain purposes, like for this military service credit piece. Then there are additional requirements. You have to have served during particular times. That's where some of the questions
in particular places.
Yeah, that's where some of the questions have come up with respect to this interruptive. But we'll provide you at the next phase. We'll go through a complete kind of coverage of what is and isn't included in interruptive military. So, for instance, military service that takes place before you're hired as a firefighter or law enforcement officer is not included in Left 2. You don't even have the option to purchase it. Other service that this is more when you're called up and away from your job to serve. But we'll go into that in more detail at the next one as well.
Very good.
Thank you, Mr.
Paddy?
Chair. I'm really sorry asking too many questions. I'm really new, so forgive me for all these stupid questions.
Questions are good.
The 50% that is waived, is that going to be covered by the pool, or would it be covered by the employer? How would that work?
It's covered by the pool.
Any other questions for Ryan? Thank you, Ryan. Okay, with that, I've been notified that lunch is here, so we're going to go ahead and take our lunch break, and then I think during our break, Steve, you going to go over the administrative update?
Will do.
Very good. All right, as we kind of go through this working lunch, we're going to go ahead and get rolling again. So you can have Director Nelson give his administrative update.
All right, there is not a PowerPoint to accompany this administrative update, but I got a couple of things that I wanted to go through with you. We have continued the rulemaking project, as you heard earlier, with the Department of Retirement Systems on duty-related disability requirements, eligibility for duty disability retirement benefits. And that's been a very cooperative and a very productive process. Expect to be wrapping that up shortly. The director of the Department of Retirement Systems and the team there expressed an interest in continuing the rulemaking process with a couple of other in a couple of other areas where that have kind of come up regarding eligibility for left positions that are primarily promotional type positions. So for instance, in some jurisdictions, a fire marshal is a promotional position that's only available to experienced firefighters. In other jurisdictions, a fire marshal might be more closer to like a building inspector type than that doesn't require. So that would be next on the agenda, and then we'll be working on that throughout the interim and keep you posted as well. It's been I want to give kudos to DRS for their inclusivity in this. Again, Sean, your timing is perfect. And Sean's actually, until his recent promotion, Sean was in charge of the project management group, so he's been in charge of this rulemaking project that's been going on. So again, thank you to you and your team, Sean, for all the work on the disability WAC so far, and we'll continue on that and continue reporting to you on the progress of that throughout the interim. Separate and apart from that, got a couple of other since our last meeting, which was at the very end of June, there haven't been any outreach activities. We haven't had board staff attend any conferences or educational events. Especially for the new members, that's something that we keep you abreast of what's going on out there, where we are. We typically will have for instance, a table, like say when WACOPS has a conference or the State Council of Firefighters has a conference, we'll have a table there manned by some of our team members answering questions for people that are there. They're there for the conference, but at the same time, then if they have questions about Left 2 or about the board, they've got resources available. And then we report to you about sort of where we are, where we are and who we're talking to. Nothing since the last meeting. For the other part of the admin update, we do quarterly, I do a budget update. This is, as I mentioned earlier, we're a small state agency, and we do things a little bit differently. We're, I believe, entirely unique. I think we're the only state agency that actually publishes our full budget report online quarterly as a public document. So the budget update, for instance, that you received in preparation for this meeting is out on the board's website. All the quarterly updates in the future are also out on the board's website. Now, to the extent, especially for the newer board members who may not even have had a chance to look at it and haven't gone through these, the budget updates in the past, you can contact me personally at any time with any questions about that document. You don't have to wait 3 months for the next update if you get a chance to look at it and a question comes up. And I will also be meeting with Representative Bergquist and Ade after this meeting. So if you have questions, then that's also fair. High level is usually what we go into on the budget update, and then answer any specific questions that might come up. High level, this is for the June quarter, this was the final quarter of the fiscal year and the final quarter of the 2-year state biennium. The agency came in, finished the biennium and finished the fiscal year under budget. Historically, that has, it hasn't been as tight as it has been. There's a couple of reasons for that. With the good work that you have been doing as a board also comes additional responsibilities. And so you've been asked to do a number of studies to help out on issues. Merger, for instance, last year. And those often did not include an appropriation. For instance, the merger study did not include an appropriation. So those are items that, particularly for this last budget, caused our margin, if you will, to be much tighter than historically. So, for instance, we finished up the biennium about $30,000 under budget, which is much less than normal. It's also, the main reason I bring it up is it's something that we will continue to look at. It's going to be a challenge for the future. So there were a couple of items in the state budget regarding salary increases that all state agencies, not just the left board, are going to have to eat in the future. This upcoming budget, we expect to be tight. I'll keep you updated again every quarter, though. Going into this budget, there was no appropriation for this interrupted military service, but that's not one where I felt like an appropriation would be necessary. The study on tribal police officers entering LEF, that was one where I was asked during session by a legislator if that was something that the board might still work on, even if there was no appropriation. I said I couldn't answer that for the board, but it was definitely a type of study where additional, contracting with either additional attorney general services or with a special attorney general would be required to do it appropriately, and there wasn't any capacity in the board's budget to do that extra work. I don't know if you will get a request either from legislators or from stakeholders throughout later on in this interim. They had sent a request last year to have the board look at this issue. So those are the types of things that may come up, and as they do, I'll keep you abreast of what capacity, if any, we have to bring in outside expertise to do those sort of specialized reports as well as they need to be done. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about the final June report that was in your materials. And again, you can ask me those questions at any time. So even if it's not now, you can call me or email me with specific questions in advance of the next meeting or at any time. No questions, Mr. Chair. And that concludes my administrative update. I do want to apologize. We had 2 people sign up to testify. They wanted to address the board. So we missed them earlier, but I talked with them during the lunch break. One of them has agreed that they don't need to testify. Their questions were mainly for the Department of Retirement Systems, and so I was happy to hand them off to Sean. But we do still have one person that would like to address the board. That's Bud Sizemore for WACOPS.
Okay. Mr. Sizemore?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, my name is Bud Sizemore. I am here representing WACOPS. I am a LEF member, and God willing, in about 11 months, I'll be an annuitant of the LEF plan. So I'm here to ask for some assistance and with member communication, whether it come through the organizations that represent the members or directly from the LEF board. I think it would be valuable. But we have some perception versus reality issues that exist in our membership. And I think, again, for the 12 and a half years that this board's been meeting, I've been hanging around, and it feels like we're about due for an update on some of that perception versus reality as it pertains to benefits. So, you know, some of the comments that I've received from members is that we have the worst system in the country, that we have the worst benefits in the country for public safety. Why don't we have dropped 3% or 1 year final average salary? So I think it would be very valuable for the member organizations to have a 1 or 2 pager that provides kind of an apples to apples benefit explanation for our members. And then certainly I believe that making a comparison or at least putting it out there in black and white, the benefit levels versus planned health, I think would be very valuable. And then certainly maybe to kind of close out for that education to members is why planned health matters. So that's the request. I don't know if that would be something that would be done during a strategic planning session or as a general course of interim work. I'm available for any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Sizemore? Go ahead, Wally.
You talk about comparisons when you're having these conversations with members. Who are we being compared to? Maybe that might be instructive for who might be tasked to draw up this paper, as you say. I mean, are they talking about California, or are they talking about Nevada? Do you know?
Yeah, that's a fair question, Wally. When that question comes up to me, I can't speak for Bud, but when that question comes up to me, that's usually one of the first things I ask. A lot of times they're not. They're all left members, so they're all from Washington. So they're comparing themselves to sort of what they've heard maybe from some of their peers, almost always in other states. Very frequently, it's a municipal plan, and they're talking about a comparison of one particular aspect of a plan. So my friend in Oakland tells me that they've got a 2.5% multiplier there. Why don't we have a 2.5% multiplier in Washington? That's the kind of, and so then it's like, well, in Oakland, their plan is funded at this ratio instead of the 100% funding that you have in Left Plan 2. Their contribution rates are this. Their employer is paying this. It's that. If you can get down to that detail, for most of the city plans, we'll never be able to do that kind of comparison. So it's more of there was a study done by the Washington State Institute for Public Policy that compared Left 2 to like 33 statewide plans. We can incorporate that kind of piece into the analysis. Ryan did his own personal work following the Institute study with some of the municipal plans. We're never going to get them all, but some of the bigger city or county plans, at least we had an idea. And again, that's part of it. So for instance, by way of example, I used to get questions all the time from a firefighter who had come from New Mexico and was like, we had a 3% multiplier in New Mexico. Why don't we have a 3% multiplier in Washington? And New Mexico actually ranked number 1 in that Institute of study. But where that study sort of left things out is like what you're talking about. Well, your employer was paying over 20% of pay in New Mexico, and in Washington right now, the employers are paying a little over about 5.5% of pay. So where's the capacity for them to take on, or you to take on, you the member, take on that additional cost? Also, comparing salaries. So for instance, 3% of your salary in New Mexico compared to 2% of your salary in Washington, how does that compare? And that's the more full type of analysis that Ryan did following the Institute study. So we could go back and refresh that and probably come up with a 1 or 2 pager, and we'll talk about it here coming up shortly as far as items for upcoming meetings. That might be a great topic for the strategic planning meeting for especially with all the new members, getting an idea of where Washington's police and fire plan compares. The results of that study, for instance, were very helpful back when it was done, because all of you, whether you're legislators or city officials, are going to be getting questions similar to what Bud's talking about here. As soon as they find out you're on the left board, they're going to start talking to you about benefit improvements. That comes with the territory.
Normally my answers are longer than Steve's, so I'll try to beat him and be shorter this time. More specifically, and you're probably aware, we have Grossman training coming up in Spokane in September for walk-ups, but there will be non-walk-ups members that will be attending, and potentially officers from Idaho and other areas. So those are a natural progression of conversations during breaks, and when folks have some free time to just converse about the profession and pension benefits and those sorts of things. So generally we're able to, if I get one of those requests from a walk-ups member, I'm able to forward it on to Steve and then hopefully get the benefit of that specific answer. But I think if we're able to just kind of continuously educate our members on level of benefits and why things are the way they are, and that plan health does matter. I mean, you guys certainly have a fiduciary responsibility to the plan, and that I think is one aspect of the initiative that our members kind of lose. It's like, why aren't you just advocating? It doesn't matter whether it's fiscally responsible or not, just get us better benefits. So I think it would be helpful, whether it's in a newsletter or as a separate entity, and certainly to the extent that it's an electronic document, then links to more extensive information is always a good thing as well. So
I think when Ryan did his presentation earlier, I think revisiting the 12-year-old list and coming up with what those costs are per item is, I think, going to be an excellent representation of what you're asking for, and will be a great 2-page. We talked about the legislation and stuff like that to educate members. I think that falls right in line with what you're asking for. Would that be correct?
Yes, sir.
Yep. Any other questions? Yes, Adi?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think I do greatly agree with you in the sense, in the terms of education. I think the state of Washington, actually all of us, because of the reduction in revenue or the growth of revenue and the ever increasing in cost, we need to start doing a better job in educating our members, because from city's point of view, the citizens are asking for more services, and they're telling you, don't tax me anymore. We can have it both ways. So I think we need to do a better job, and I think Mr. Nelson pointed out earlier in our conversation that we may have to take this show on the road, educating people about the services, the benefits that they are getting. And it's the same people that will tell you you're taxing me too much. And the same people that say, well, I need more. So where is the more going to come from? And until we start educating them and educating ourselves, I think some of the study that the board agreed to do, I think that will be a part of the tool. I think we need to do it, at least initially, more than just posting something on the web. Maybe when we do the road show, there'll be a 2-page that are handed out. But we need to engage our members for them to ask some of these questions and for us to be able to point out the flaws in the, like Mr. Nelson just pointed out, yes, when you're comparing yourself to, this other state, these are other things that you're not considering. For us in federal, we're recruiting a lot of people from New Mexico, from Hawaii, where the salary rate is really low, but I'm sure maybe the benefit is really high. But you can't have high benefit and high salary together. And I hope we will be able to do that soon, but not before we complete the study, because I think that will further enhance the educational process of that benefit, so that whatever we come up with, how do we fund this? Thank you.
And yeah, would I agree? Yes, I would absolutely agree with that. And, another, I think, a benefit, I think there's the obvious benefit to the members so that they can have an apples-to-apples comparison to the people that they talk to within the professions. But I also believe that it could be a tool for employers in recruitment. So I'm getting a brand new fire chief here, job offer, I believe, given last night. The benefit structure matters to them, and if they have if a fire chief or a police chief coming from out of state has a perception about Washington's woefully poor pension system, they may not choose to even apply for those jobs. So I believe that employers could utilize this tool as well as a recruitment tool for positions that they wish to fill.
Mr. Chair, and particularly for the new board members, I never get tired of bragging about you guys. The board members who've been around a little bit longer understand some of the successes that you have had, and they're remarkable. So when the Institute for Public Policy did that study, just by kind of a spoiler alert, when we put together the 2-pager or whatever, this is the kind of stuff that's going to be in it. The Institute for Public Policy compared 33 statewide plans, and they used a ratio of income replacement. How much of your pre-retirement income did you continue on into your pension? And using that metric, Washington ranked about 23rd out of the 33 plans that they looked at. So a little bit right in the middle, just very slightly below average. But as soon as you incorporated things like, well, like you mentioned, continuing on part of your New Mexico salary or your Hawaii salary is not an apples to apples to continuing on. When Ryan did his follow-up report that showed what is your total retirement income, taking salary, for instance, into account, Washington was one of the top 5 plans in the country. So by that metric, that would be the type of thing that would be helpful for recruiting. Similarly, the plan health, if you are a Chicago policeman, it doesn't matter what your benefits are, it matters what benefits you can reasonably expect to be getting in the future, and that's not as guaranteed as it is here in Washington State. That you can't put a price tag on, but one of the things that does affect all Left 2 members, contribution rate stability. if your rates are going up, it comes right out of their paycheck, so it's a kitchen table issue. We were able to show historically how remarkably stable Left Plan 2 contribution rates have been since the inception of the Left 2 board. When the market crashed in 2008 and 2009, Left Plan 2 was the only statewide plan in the country, not just in Washington State, but in the entire country, that came through the Great Recession with no contribution rate increases, still 100% funded, and no benefit cuts. The only statewide plan in the country. Every other statewide plan, including all the other plans in Washington, either had rate increases, had their funding ratio decrease below 100, or had benefit cuts, or all three was not uncommon. So the job that you guys did is remarkable. I get asked all the time from plans in California and New Jersey and Alaska and everywhere else, will you come and talk, or will you come and talk to our association like NCPERS or whatever it is? Will you come and explain to us what you did in Washington so that we can perhaps benefit from that? And one of the things I joke about, I don't mean to joke about it, especially I don't mean to be disrespectful because we've got legislators in the room, but it's like one of the things I always say is I get more questions from plans around the country than I do from right on the other side of the lake. And so there are some things I think that you have done with respect to Left 2, for instance, that could easily be replicated for PERS 2 and benefit the state as well as the PERS 2 members in the same way that the state has benefited from your management of Left 2. And we'll talk, that piece will definitely come up in the strategic planning meeting, because especially for the new members, it's important to understand what you have done for Left 2 that's different for what's been done with the other plans. It might be very easy to you'll hear things, for instance, Washington does a great job with their plans, which is true as a whole, but you do an even better job with Left 2 than you do with the other plans. And that's to your tribute. So with that, I'll stop bragging about you guys and
If I may, I think you're absolutely right. I think after being involved in national issues through GFOA, you're absolutely right. Washington State has one of the best retirement plans. But I think what is the conversation is, do we really know that? Do our members know that? You know, I think people don't comprehend the difference between defined benefit and defined contribution. I can say, well, I'll be contributing $10,000 towards your retirement plan, and I'll say I'll guarantee you this much when you retire. At times, some of our members, they're looking at the current $10,000 that you are contributing. But if the rate of return is nothing, you ain't getting that much. And that is what happened in a lot of states. They have higher contribution ratio where it is not guaranteed. What we have in the state of Washington with Left 2 is defined benefit. Regardless of what you contribute, this is what you will get. And that is a lot of benefit. But our people often don't make the connection between defined benefit and defined contribution. So I think what is being referred to is for us to educate our members that when you hear somebody from Hawaii say, well, they are contributing this much, well, it's not what is being contributed today. You know, the whole essence of retirement is, what will I get when I retire? You know, and I think that is the wonder that the state has done, and also the way we've managed the fund itself to make sure that what we promise you, when the time comes, it will be there. So, you're absolutely right. Thank you.
Thank you, Adi.
Mr. Chair, that concludes my administrative report. But I'd be happy to answer any other questions if there are any.
Any questions for Director Nelson? Nope. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on to item 6, and that's our Executive Director, COLA.
We have the conference room right across next to the lunchroom reserved for you to go into executive session to discuss that. And then do you have and then we'll resume the meeting when you come back out. Mike?
Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd ask that we move to executive session for purpose of employee review and compensation discussion.
You have a second. Any questions, discussion on that?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
When moving into executive session, it is generally required to give an estimated amount of time that you're going to be in executive session so that the public is on notice at what time they can return.
Sure. I would say 30 minutes. And then, okay. Do we need a vote on that? No. Okay. So we'll have a short 30-minute recess, and we'll be in executive session. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and resume the meeting. We're back out of executive session. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion that our board affirm the same COLA, cost of living adjustment increases found in the 2017 through 2019 biennial budget for state employees for the executive director, and grant the executive director that COLA.
And that'd be the same COLA that all state employees are receiving. Is that correct?
Yes.
Second.
Okay. Motion second. Any questions, discussion on that? No questions? All right, motion passes.
Vote.
Oh, sorry, I did it again. I'm not king. I am. I'm always optimistic. All right, I guess we need to put that to a vote. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Anyone abstaining? All right, motion passes with the vote. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd make a motion to direct the administrative committee to do a salary survey and review study of comparable positions to the executive director of the Lefty Board.
I'll second that.
We have a second. All right, questions on that motion? Okay. We'll put it to a vote. All those in favor? Aye. All those not? Abstaining? All right, motion passes. I think that takes us to our items for future meetings, agendas.
Mr. Chair and board members, thank you. And then, yes, the final item on the agenda is agenda items for future meetings. The way things line up now, doing a little bit of work while you guys were in executive session, historically, the board has always canceled their August meeting. And I spoke with the admin committee earlier about, depending on the workload, whether that could still work this interim, kind of, since it's kind of compressed. And if you choose to cancel your August meeting, I think we can manage all of the assignments that you gave us today with the remaining meetings. I also spoke with the admin committee earlier that the October meeting is typically used for strategic planning, and so that would remain the plan this year. So as far as agenda items for future meetings, what we would be looking at is nothing in August. In September, we would have initial presentations on the two items that you moved today, plus a follow-up presentation on the interruptive military service credit. We'll also work with DRS and SIB and some of these other presenters to see what they can have ready for September. For instance, the financial audit might also be done, and we can add those to the agenda. October would be, also in September would be board elections. That's where you would be electing chair, vice chair, and your employer representative to the administrative committee. The October meeting then would be the offsite for strategic planning. In November, we would come back. In September, I think the actuary also mentioned that their items would be ready in September as well. And then November would be reserved for follow-up on any of the items or new stuff that might come up in September, and we'd have final presentations in December. So roughly, that's what the interim would look like based on your actions today. If that's acceptable to you, that is something that would require a motion, but that's the rough outline of the interim work plan then.
Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd move that we adopt the agenda as established just now by Steve.
Second. Any questions, discussion on that? For the new members, Steve, on the October meeting, is there any explanation we should give there?
The October meeting usually is not, does not have action items on it in the sense of motions and votes and hearing about presentations like benefit improvements. It's strategic planning and related issues. So for instance, one of the things that will be going on this interim is I'll be meeting with each of you individually to talk about your expectations as a board member from our team in terms of how we'll support you. At the October meeting, that's one of the times where we'll usually report back on that. I'm not saying for sure that that'll be, because a couple of the things that I heard today with respect to the October meeting, especially with the number of new members, it will probably bring up the strategic plan, both to make sure that everybody's aware of what the board is doing and why you're doing it, the way you're doing it, see if there's any changes. Anytime you've got new people, there's always the opportunity for new input and new changes. We'll talk about the related issue of kind of towards the pricing. Was 14 years ago, the board sort of prioritized if there was going to be a big benefit improvement, it was going to be a multiplier increase. And why? Talk about that with you guys and maybe get your see if this group of board members feels the same. You know, there's only one board member that's the same from 12 years ago, and so you may have a different idea. And then we'll put together some of the documents that you talked about today about the history of the bill passage, what the board has accomplished up until now, where you rank compared to other plans. We'll be able to go through all of that with you. And then one of the things that we did last year with Lisa from the actuary's office that was very helpful, and we'll kind of build on this year, was a conversation about an actuarial issue. So it's not like a presentation, it's less formal. But one of the things that might be helpful is, for instance, what are you guys doing different from PERS 2? You're invested in the same fund as the State Investment Board. You're administered by the Department of Retirement Systems, the exact same as PERS 2. So why are your rates so stable in LEF 2 and PERS rates are going up? Why is your funding ratio at one level and PERS 2, which is a very well-run plan, at a different level? Understanding what it is, what you historically have done differently that led you to where you are now. That might be helpful not only for in your role as board members and as part of this educational piece that you talked about in a number of different contexts today, but particularly whether it's through the Association of Cities or whether it's through the legislature, that information might be helpful as pension funding issues continue to come up. Already, Representative Bergquist, you now rank as one of the pension experts in Washington on the just by attending one meeting. The community of pension legislators is fairly small, and so you will be sought out very quickly for these types of issues in the future. And so the goal will be give you some groundwork to help you in that. So roughly, that's the kind of stuff that we talk about in October that's different from like these issue-specific topics that we go through the report process with. It's still an open public meeting. It's usually not held here. We do get some members of the public still show up, but not as much. When it was originally set up, the hope of some of the board members was that it would be less formal, more conversational, and more conversational amongst you guys, with the opportunity to get to sort of know each other. So usually we would also have some things built up, whether it's smaller work teams or something, so that you get to know each other as individuals more than just the brief bio that you had the opportunity to share today. That kind of stuff is what goes on in October.
All right, thank you, Steve. All right, if that discussion's complete, go ahead and take a vote on the future agenda. It's already been seconded. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay. Against? Abstaining? Nope. Motion passes. That's our last meeting item. Is there anything else for the good of the order? New business? Old business? Okay. If not, go ahead and that'll conclude today's meeting. Thanks everyone for your attendance and staff for their work.